All right, things are heating up. Former Vice President Mike Pence now officially in the race, launching his presidential campaign. However, the Republican hopeful likely to have a rocky road to the White House, as will pretty much everyone else in the field. The latest poll by NewsNation, most registered voters would rather see Pence as former President Trump's running mate in an upcoming election. Pence may not want to step back into that role of VP after the events of January 6th, though, and here's what he had to say about that.
President Trump's words were reckless. They endangered my family and everyone at the Capitol. But the American people deserve to know that on that day, President Trump also demanded that I choose between him and the Constitution. Now voters will be faced with the same choice.
Today, a pro-Pence super PAC is out with its first ad, and it also takes aim at former President Trump on January 6th.
A weak man appeases a mob. A man of courage and character stands up to them.
I want to bring in NewsNation contributor and former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer now. Thank you for being with us this morning. Let's start with Pence. He says it is his duty to run for president, but can he win?
No. I mean, that's the simple answer.
Why not?
Look, the thing is, well, I mean, first of all, there's two issues. Number one, when you look at current polling, mostly in the early states, Trump's got an enormous lead. Now, could that evaporate? Sure. But there's already a number two, Ron DeSantis. I mean, Pence is actually polling well below many of the other candidates that are alternatives. So he's not exactly even the number two choice of folks. Number two, in the announcement yesterday, he largely began the whole thing by reciting several accomplishments of the Trump-Pence administration. At one point, he even said, I was proud to stand with President Trump when we did all this. It's not to the very end in which he's making a distinction. The distinction is not on policy. And I'm not undermining by any means the events of January 6th, but I'm just saying, do enough people care about those events to vote on them and to vote for Pence? And I don't think that there is enough people. The people that are with Pence now, which is between maybe 4 and 6%, are the ones who know all of that. Everything that was said in the ad, everything that was said in the announcement, people know. And if you're either with Mike Pence now or you're not going to be, and I just don't think he's got enough of a compelling case to say the former number two should now replace the current number one that's still running.
Let's talk about Chris Christie for a moment. He is aggressively going after Trump more than most. Does he have a chance to make up some ground?
Well, currently, Christie's polling in the Real Clear average at 1%. So can he make up some ground? Sure. But again, I would go back to the fact that DeSantis is polling in the mid-20s right now. And there's several other alternatives than Christie that are polling at 4, 5, 6, 7%. Christie's main argument seems to be, I'm the guy who's going to go straight at Donald Trump. Republican and conservative grassroots voters, I think, are looking for an alternative on policy. If you can get to the right of Trump, talk about how you'll be more committed to pro-life issues, to judicial nominees, or securing the border, something like that, I think that might resonate. But if the entire argument, I can go at him more than anybody else, I don't see that that's a wide enough lane to get anything more than 5, 6% tops.
So if you're right, it's a two-man race between Donald Trump and the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis. How does Ron DeSantis differentiate himself with the base and what some say is an impenetrable Trump base?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's two parts to this. How he can differentiate himself is kind of what I was saying with respect to Pence and Christie. And what he's been doing, frankly, and I give him credit for it, he's been getting to the right of Trump on policy issues and talking about how he's willing to take on some of those cultural battles, those right-to-life issues. He talks about the distinction of the bill that he signed in Florida and Donald Trump's rhetoric on life issues. So I think that's the right angle, is to try to focus on where you are more committed in terms of principle and policy than Trump. Secondly, as far as how to win, I don't think that anybody disagrees that if you can't win 1 or 2 early states, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, or South Carolina, it's game over. If DeSantis can show that he could actually take down the nominee, is what Trump basically is right now, I think donors and activists will flock to him feeling that it's a safe bet that he might do it. But if you can't knock him off in one of the first early states, he's going to continue to accumulate those delegates. And I think both donors and activists are going to be afraid to come to his aid because they don't want to be on a losing side.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.